Woo, woo, woo,
Are we live? Yeah.
Woo!
oh, yup.
Kanahus, can we hear you?
Yes, I'm here. We're here to stop
Woo!
this pipeline.
Sweet.
You're here to stop a
Yeah,
government
yeah.
from control too.
Yes, Canada.
We the government.
All right, is it are we broadcasting? Okay, we're live. Excellent.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Danse, Buju, Zongi Benisi and Nene Tishnakas, Kinutotem. Hello, everybody. My name is Clayton Thomas Mueller, and I'm the Stop It at the Source campaigner with the Global Climate Organization 350.org. I'm also a Cree man from Pugatawagan Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory, northern Manitoba. I'm coming at you live here from Coast Salish territory in the beautiful city of Vancouver, very near the Kinder Morgan construction site, the Westridge Terminal, very near the sacred Burrard Inlet, of which the Coastal Salish people have derived their livelihood from, their connection to the sacredness of Mother Earth from, for the last many thousands of years. This beautiful place that I am speaking to you from is under an incredible threat by the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, formerly known as the Kinder Morgan Pipeline, now owned shamefully by Canada, by Canadian taxpayers, as a result of the recent controversial announcement of the Justin Trudeau administration vis-a-vis Finance Minister Bill Morneau, stating that they were going to purchase this pipeline for $4.5 billion from Kinder Morgan to mitigate all of the risk that this private Houston-based energy corporation was facing as a result of some of the people who are going to be speaking to you today from their hearts. We have an amazing list of speakers. Kanahus Manuel from the Tiny House Warriors, Skokutmak woman from the interior of these lands that they call British Columbia. We're going to hear from her and the incredible work that they're doing, organizing their people to protect their lands from the threat that this pipeline faces. We're going to hear from a young leader who I care very much about. I've been spending a lot of time with this young man. It's my nephew, George Parker. His mother comes from across the medicine line and is from the Tulalip Nation, and his father is Reuben George, one of the loudest voices in this fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the expansion of the tar sands. And so he's been doing a lot of really good work. We'll hear from him. And of course, we're going to hear from my dear friend and allied campaigner from Fort Chipewyan, from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, Ariel Deranger, the Executive Director of Indigenous Climate Action, Canada's premier Indigenous climate justice organization. So we're really excited to hear from her perspective as a person who has been living with the expansion of the Alberta tar sands for many decades. Unfortunately, our dear friend Will George, the keeper of the watch house that was erected by the elders and young people of Tsleil-Waututh to keep an eye on, the incursion of Kinder Morgan in their traditional territory, is resting today. He's been really going hard at it, so we send our love and prayers to him. He's not going to be able to join us today, again, what we're talking about today is this controversial decision that the federal government of Canada has made, to utilize taxpayers' money to, buy an old leaky pipeline, a 66-year-old pipeline that Kinder Morgan acquired for, roughly $600 million a few years back, is just ludicrous. We all heard the statistics around the cost associated to fixing the water crisis in First Nations communities. There are 91 long-term boil water advisories across these lands they call Canada in First Nations. This is a fundamental human rights situation that so many communities are facing, and it could be fixed with just $3.2 million. There have been many citizens and First Nations alike crunching the numbers of what meaningful investments that $4.5 billion could provide, and juxtaposing that against the promises of the Trudeau administration that they made before they got elected into a majority government, with the biggest one being the ratification and meaningful implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous peoples, addressing the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls crisis, addressing the housing crisis and water crisis on First Nations, and of course, the suicide epidemic that our children have been facing, as a result of how bad things have become in our communities as a result of derelict government oversight of First Nations policy. And so, we're really happy. I'm really happy to be here. I encourage you to please share the link, for this live stream. We'll be taking questions for the next, hour. I'm going to be running this a little bit different. We're going to do a World Cafe style, and so I'll be asking questions, to the participants, to our panelists, and getting their answers. So there'll be a little bit more interaction, and I'll weave some of your questions that you have for our panelists into the World Cafe discussion. So with that, I want to open up, first and foremost, I want to start with Kanahus Manuel, and then the rest of our panelists can follow up. My first question is, what are your thoughts on this recent decision by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to bail out one of the biggest energy servicing companies on the planet, Houston-based Kinder Morgan?
Well, I believe that Canada is just creating a big smokescreen, that they try to make Indigenous people and our voice invisible once again, that it shows the risk not only to us as Secwepemc people that Canada is willing to bail out any type of resource extraction, corporation, or here in Canada or here in our territory, but all across Canada. It shows that they're willing to bail out these corporations that are going to lose money, and the risk is so high because of Indigenous resistance, and they don't want to acknowledge that there is any form of Indigenous resistance at all, because they want to ignore the fact that we have title to our lands. And as an Indigenous person, and as an Indigenous person that has been for generations involved in this, my father, my grandfather, that's been getting title and rights, to the forefront, that we have exclusive jurisdiction over our territories, and that includes making decisions on our lands. And for us, when we say no consent, we don't give our consent for this pipeline, we expect that to be respected by Canada. We are a nation. Secwepemc Nation, we are a nation, 180,000 square kilometers of unceded, unsurrendered territory. There's no treaty here. We never lost our land ever to conquest by war or treaty. And so when we stand in our inherent title and rights to our land, that we can never give it up. Not one person could sell out our land, to bring this pipeline through. The same time as this decision is being made, there's a spill in a Kinder Morgan pumping station within our territory. We were one of the first monitors on site, and it was far more than 100 liters, in which the Ministry of Environment reported on. And Kinder Morgan eagerly stood behind the numbers that it was 100 liters. It was far more than 100 liters. We saw the spill that happened, just the pressure alone that covered that whole building. And they tried to cover it up. They hired our own people, our own Secwepemc people from one of the local bands to be the security for that facility, knowing that that is a divide and conquer tactic that we see far too often at the hands of the Canadian government and at the hands of these corporations. This is a violation of human rights and Indigenous rights that's happening here with Canada's decision.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the incredible legacy of your late father and your late grandfather, and it's so inspiring to see the work that you carry on, Kanahus. And it has been just baffling to watch the domestic media, the national media here in Canada, and the the kind of spin doctoring of the Trudeau administration to just try and put the emphasis on the government of BC. They haven't mentioned the unbreakable wall of municipalities and First Nations. Hundreds of First Nations have come out in support of this cause and said no to Kinder Morgan and to the federal government of Canada. But yet, whenever you hear these liberals, these grits talk about this in the media, they just blame John Horgan. It's a scrap between John Horgan and Rachel Notley, and they don't mention the First Nations lawsuits that are still being heard before the colonial courts of Canada. Ariel, I want to go to Alberta, jump over to you and get your perspective on this question about how, what do you think about this decision? You recently spoke on Democracy Now! About it very well. So, yeah, let's hear about it.
I was on Democracy Now! Just yesterday morning, bright and early, and my thoughts are generally, like, it's a lot in line with what Kanahus is saying, that this is a project that undermines and violates the rights of Indigenous peoples. But really the crux of it is that this isn't just a singular project. Like, we like to paint it, or the government likes to paint it as like, this is a pipeline and we're going to talk about this pipeline as if it's this singular entity. But the reality is this pipeline signals to the Alberta tar sands that it's business as usual. Let's green light. Let's just keep going. Just a couple days before the decision to approve the Kinder Morgan, or not approve, buy the Kinder Morgan pipeline, they also approved 4 new tailings projects in Alberta that don't even meet the weak minimum standards and regulations that they have created in the province. And this is the biggest problem. These tar sands projects, whether they're pipelines, refineries, tailings, or emission standards, or any of the other associated infrastructure, continue to fail to meet the regulations and the standards that the government is setting, that they're creating these standards and regulations because First Nations communities whose lives, culture, and rights rely on intact and protected ecosystems have pushed for decades for better regulation, better monitoring, better policies, and the government creates these policies, but they don't actually enforce them. So we're talking about a government not only green lighting, but purchasing and promoting and pushing to the people as an economic driver of the entire country that continues to violate both environmental and human and Indigenous rights within Alberta. And that's just our production end. This is not just about production in Alberta. This is not just about the pipeline and the dangers that it brings to the interior, as Kanahus's community has experienced already. But this is going to bring huge, not just risks, but real actual threats to the ocean, to the coastal waters along British Columbia, into the northern waters, into the southern waters. And we don't have Trudeau has just gone on the record of adopting new policies to protect the oceans, but he's buying a pipeline that's going to put dirty, toxic oil that sinks to the bottom into a giant pipeline to ship close to 1 million liters of oil per day that's going to be put into giant ships into these coastal waters. It's absolutely insane that we're talking about building a project that violates Indigenous rights, that threatens environmental and intact ecosystems that are critical for climate stabilization, and that is going to create 72 megatons of CO2 emissions annually. This is the opposite direction that this country should be going in. And I think, what's been really, really troubling for me is that divisiveness that Kanahus is talking about. How there were community people from her, people at her community that were involved with the cleanup of the spill, that are involved in as workers for Kinder Morgan. We're seeing this right now in Alberta. My First Nation, the Athabasca First Nation, Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, who used to be at the forefront of this challenge, is now one of the First Nations that's coming on board saying, we want to be owners and buy this. And why is that? A lot of people have been asking me that. And the reality is this divide and conquer. We have seen close to 60 years of tar sands development in Alberta. Not just one project, but hundreds and hundreds of projects in our traditional territory, to the point that no matter what we did, no matter if we took it to the courts, no matter if we protested in the streets, these projects were continually approved in the public's interest to the point that they have broken down our people and the spirit of our people. But these chiefs and the leadership that are making these deals and making these, big, bold commitments to buy and be owners of the pipeline, they don't have the backing of their own community members. And we're going to continue to see that opposition not just rise in British Columbia, but we're going to start to see it rise once again here in the original territories and at the source of Alberta's tar sands. And I hope that we can all come together to not just stop this pipeline, but to stop the expansion of Alberta's tar sands and the development of tanker traffic in coastal BC.
Yeah, thank you for that very powerful insight area. And it's so incredible, the work of Indigenous Climate Action and being based in Alberta as a national climate justice organization. I think we're all really excited to see what kind of organizing you're all able to do in so-called Alberta, in Cree and Dene and Métis territory, to inspire the grassroots people to hold their leaders accountable and to support their leaders to, make the tough decisions in terms of transitioning off of fossil fuels. It's interesting, both you and Kanahus talk about, tar sands threats to water and the way that bitumen sinks when it hits the water and the solvents in it evaporate. It sinks like a hockey puck. And we saw this with the Enbridge tar sands pipeline rupture a few years ago in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Enbridge has spent over $1 billion trying to clean that river up, and they have not been able to. They were forced to buy out all the property owners along the river. Those people have never been able to return back because that place is poisoned now. And they have spent over $1 billion trying to clean it up, and to no avail. And so when Justin Trudeau gets up and says, world-class ocean protection, when Bill Morneau or Jim Carr or Catherine McKenna or Dr. Bennett or Justice Minister Jody Rebick, or Robichaud, I always say her name wrong, but gets up and says, world-class ocean protection system, $1.5 billion, that's peanuts. Okay, because just a small pipeline rupture, never mind a super tanker running aground, they spent over $1 billion trying to clean that up and have failed. So I want to take us, back to where I'm speaking to all of you who have tuned into our live stream. Share the live stream, please, and do send in your questions. We'll get to those shortly. I want to take us back to our relative here, my nephew, Cedar George Parker. What are your thoughts on this government announcement and purchase of the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, Cedar? And you've got kind of two perspectives. You got that across the medicine line perspective, that kind of Cascadia perspective, but we also want to hear, your perspective as to Tsleil-Waututh.
Hey, can y'all hear me all right? Okay. Blues Teat Stott to Tsleil-Waututh, Blues Teat Stott to Layla. Once again, my name is Cedar George Parker from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and the Tulalip tribes. And as soon as I heard about it, I thought about why I got into this fight, which was I thought about all the subsidies that the governments give to the oil companies in the United States and Canada. And how I got to hear that information was that I was in a high school shooting back in 2014, October 24th. And when I had that school shooting, we didn't have enough money to get counselors for the whole year. So a lot of us couldn't get counselors. We didn't have time. There's lineups just to see counselors. Kids were dropping out of school. Kids were suicidal. So ended up having a lot of kids with suicide, a lot of alcoholics, a lot of drug addicts, and in the school district, the most dropouts, including myself. And so I thought, and then I realized how much billions of dollars of subsidies the United States and Canada puts into these oil companies that should be going to the social uplift programs, that should be going towards social uplift programs for the people, by the people. And then I thought about all of the people that struggle in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is the bad part. I thought about all the people on the drugs. I thought about all the kids starving in Canada, all the reservations that are running out of water, clean water. So that made me a little angry that Trudeau put profit over the people, over the Canadian people. It's not just an Indigenous issue, but it's an everybody issue now. It's just that sometimes the reservations get it the most. And with that, Justin Trudeau and his government have put profit over the people. And it's more than just a pipeline problem, environmental problem. It's a problem on how the government of Canada has treated the Indigenous people, the First Nations of Canada, for over 500 years. Was I surprised at this? No, not at all, because I went with history. We were talking to my sister, what do you think? And I said, I think they're going to buy it. Because not once in 500 years have they been on our side. Not once have they done anything. So I went with history and I said, they're going to buy it. They're going to do whatever it takes to put this through. They're not going to talk to the nations who don't want it, but they're going to talk to the nations who want it. And they're going to buy out the people who want it. They're going to buy them out because they have millions and billions of dollars of subsidies. And that's just the truth. And they'll use those millions and billions of dollars of subsidies to push people, to push governments, judges, people, policemen into getting on board with this. And it has even came out in studies, it's even came out in the press that Kinder Morgan has paid out news outlets to be pro-pipeline. And that's not right. So
yeah, well,
many
building upon that, can you tell us, what does this mean for Cascadia? What does this mean for the movement? Sorry, go ahead.
So what this means is that, this is the only temperate rainforest in the world, and you could even say that salmon is at the base of the ecosystem. So if you kill, everything goes into the streams and rivers to eat the salmon. Our people live off the salmon. I think about even 70% to 90% of my people's diet came from the sea. So even that in itself, our creation stories come from the sea. Our first two people came from the sea. Who we are is the sea. Our highways came from the sea, is what my mother told me. And what this means is that if this pipeline goes through, there's an 87% chance of a spill. And what this means, it'll kill my identity if you kill the water. You'll kill the identity of not only myself, but the people who live in the Puget Sound area, which is part of the Sailor Sea, and it'll affect the Seattle area, and it'll affect everything. It'll affect our economy in negative ways because it's not if a spill happens, it's when a spill happens. It'll affect our tourism, that people come all over the world to do tourism in Seattle and Vancouver. Seattle is the epicenter of technology. We have Amazon, Microsoft, Xbox. And we also have it all the way up in Vancouver, too. It'll affect the laws. And Vancouver's the third biggest movie industry besides Los Angeles, New York. And people come there to make their movies because of the atmosphere. So it'll affect our economies that way, too, through tourism. And this is the biggest thing, our seafood industry. I mean, people don't, I'm at 5 minutes. I'm at 4 minutes. So it'll affect our economies. It'll affect our identity. It'll affect who we are. But the biggest thing is that Kinder Morgan signed an agreement that when a pipeline spill happens, they'll provide the lower mainland, the Vancouver area people with bottled water. So what about where Kanahus lives, and what about the over 4 million people that live in the Puget Sound area of Seattle? So this is bringing up big discussion. I also have a friend right here, Emily, with me, who's part of the Victoria. She lives in Victoria, which is another major city on the Sailor Sea. So as you can see, all around the world, people are supporting Tsleil-Waututh Nation and the overall fight against the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline that Trudeau accepted. We have rallies down in Seattle. We have people ready to fight down in Seattle. We shut down the terminals down in Seattle. We had marches here just yesterday in Victoria, and people are coming together. So how I felt about this overall was a little bit hopeful because, you know what, we're bringing people together. These three main cities are coming together. We're in solidarity with Kanahus Manuel. We're with the Manuel family up there. We're in solidarity. We're educating the people, and what the elder said is now is the time to make allies and educate the people on the true facts of this pipeline and pipelines to come. And overall, everything, Canada will be left behind in the dust when it comes to the global economy, which is going forward with green energy. So I feel kind of bad for Canada. That's how I feel. I feel bad for Trudeau. You know what I mean? He's a weak leader.
I feel very similar. Justin Trudeau has demonstrated that he has zero morality. He's morally bankrupt. This man ran on a platform to inspire an entirely new generation of millennials to vote him into power. He inspired a record participation of First Nations in a settler colonial state election. You know, historically, Native people across these lands they call Canada have not voted in federal elections. But Justin Trudeau brought them out with his promises to, you know, get it right when it comes to reconciliation in these lands they call Canada. And he, you know, broke the hearts of a lot of these young people who thought that he was going to transition our economy to a zero carbon economy and not force Canadians to have to sacrifice Native communities at the altar of irresponsible climate and energy policies. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're all very, very angry right now with this Liberal majority government being led by Justin Trudeau. Ariel, how does this affect your community up in Northern Alberta? You've talked about it a little bit initially here, but you know you're dealing with a lot of complexities: economic blackmail, you know, exploitation of socioeconomic circumstances by both the private sector, Rachel Notley's government, and Justin Trudeau's government. You know, what is happening on the ground? What are the people saying?
You know, I think it's really complicated because, you know, we have leadership in a lot of the communities in the Fort McMurray area, not just my own. So we have the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, the Mikisew Cree First Nation, the Fort McKay First Nation, the Fort McMurray First Nation, and the Prairie Chippewa Dene First Nation, and they're part of a council called the Athabasca Tribal Council. You know, I think the biggest complication is that you hit the nail on the head when you talked about economic blackmail. A lot of these communities were living in abject poverty at the beginning of the development of Alberta's oil sands. Not only were we living in an abject poverty, but we were living that way because of the collapse of the fur trade industry, where we had essentially been, you know, pushed to the fringes of that industry already through entrenched racism and white supremacy, even in that economic industry. And then there was the collapse of that industry through various different means, including the pressures of environmental groups in the 60s to end the fur industry. You know, there's lots of reasons that precipitated that, but this new industry was sort of emerging in our region, and we had no say in it whatsoever. We had no say as to whether or not we wanted these projects. There were no consultation processes created to look at the impacts of how these projects were going to not just impact our rights as people, but they didn't even have mechanisms for measuring the impacts on the water systems or the environment when they began to develop tar sands. And they did this from the early 60s all the way until the 1990s with very, very little oversight or regulations and almost zero consultation with our communities. So, you know, let's fast forward into the early 2000s. We had the Mikisew Cree First Nation step up and launch some litigations against the Crown for lack of consultation, for the impacts of this industry. But at the same time, there were businesses. A lot of our communities were developing economic endeavors. A lot of them were service providers, things like waste management, catering services, and those types of sort of just essential services for people. But our biggest purchasers of our services ended up being the oil and gas sector. And so as our communities raise concern over the issues in the region, we get basically put into an economic blackmail situation where these companies say, you don't like our business, then we're going to cancel our contracts, or we're going to take this away from you, we're going to give it to somebody else. I thought you guys were good players. And you now look at 2018 and you see what's happening with a lot of the chiefs in the region. But at the same time, you know, a lot of those chiefs, even Boucher, the chief of Fort McKay First Nation, who's been touted as sort of this like poster boy for the oil sands industry, if you actually have a real conversation with him, he talks about how he was on the front lines of the protests, of blockades in the region, about how he sees how this industry is destroying the lands. And our chiefs and our leadership just honestly have felt like they've had no other choice but to just sort of lay down and accept this as the status quo of what the economy is in our region. But the people don't feel that way. The people feel like our leaders need to stand up. that we need to be protecting our traditional territories, that we need to be protecting our waterways, that we need to be protecting the animals and the fish in the river, the birds in the sky, the moose and the caribou and the bison. These things all need to be protected, and there's not a single person in our communities that will state otherwise. It's just, how do we do that? And I think that this is where it becomes so incredibly important for all of the people in Alberta, for all of the people that are seeing this contamination and the devastation in our region, to not give up hope, because it's our voices that are going to put pressure on our elected leadership, our chiefs, our chief and council, who are really just agents of the colonial government, to stop doing this and stop sacrificing our rights. And, the Kinder Morgan has a direct correlation for my community, because the largest ever proposed tar sands mine, proposed by a Vancouver-owned company called Teck Resources, is trying to get the approval of a mine 17 kilometers from the boundary of my First Nation. 17 kilometers. And one of the companies that's been approached to fill the Kinder Morgan pipeline is Teck Resources. So we see the direct linkages, not just between the theory of oil going through the pipeline, but directly. Teck Resources, largest ever proposed mine, putting oil into a pipeline that's going to cross over Secwepemc territory, that's going to go down through other Indigenous territories, that's going to go to Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, all the Coast Salish communities, and go into the river systems. We have a direct tie, and we have to stop these projects. We have to stop Teck Resources. It's going to create another 4 megatons of emissions into the air. It's going to destroy thousands and thousands of hectares of pristine land that's critical for caribou, bison. It's going to take water from the Athabasca River system, and it's going to continue to destroy and erode the rights of Indigenous communities. It's going to take the concerted effort of all of those voices that are opposing Kinder Morgan to stand up and oppose the expansion of Alberta's tar sands. And so we have to constantly remind ourselves that this isn't just about a singular pipeline, but what's at the source. If you really truly believe in addressing the climate crisis and supporting Indigenous rights, we got to keep it in the ground. And that's not just stopping a pipeline, but that's stopping the expansion together collectively as a unified voice. And I always find it so beautiful to be able to sit in these panels with my brothers and sisters along the coast and in the interior that are all a part of this growing movement of Indigenous people that are standing up, because we're not just doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for our communities, and we're doing it for the communities beyond our own communities, because we understand what the climate crisis is going to bring. We're all seeing the impacts of climate change. Look at what just happened in Puerto Rico. Over 4,500 people died. Our government is literally signing their death warrants for the folks down in the global south and along the equator, because we're seeing increasing storms. We have a responsibility, not just to ourselves as Indigenous people, but to Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is crying out, and we have to step up, and we need to stand up, and we need to warrior up, just like Ta'a says. We need to warrior up now.
Yes, we do need to warrior up all across this country, and not just Indigenous peoples, but everybody. Kanahus, I know you spent a significant amount of time in Standing Rock, joining our relatives in South Dakota in the fight against the Energy Transfer's DAPL pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline. I went down there as well from where I live in Treaty 1, and there was this beautiful statement that came out after that occupation ended, and I think it came from the holy man Orville Looking Horse, and he said that Standing Rock is everywhere. And and I think that that's the really beautiful thing that I appreciate about these types of webinars and panels with land defenders, water protectors, coming together to talk about and educate the public that we're not activists, we're not protesters. We are Indigenous peoples asserting our territorial jurisdiction. We are meeting our responsibilities to uphold our sovereign laws. And, so there's a question here. I'm going to switch to take a couple of questions here in Kanahus, if you could be the first to answer. Lucio Doglini Major asks, does the decision to purchase the Kinder Morgan project with taxpayers' dollars reproduce violent relationships between the state and Indigenous peoples? And if so, what does this mean for efforts toward reconciliation touted by Justin Trudeau and his government's platform? Canahus.
Yeah, I believe it does bring violence to us as Indigenous people, because violence to our lands is directly connected to the violence of Indigenous people. And we've seen far too often that the way that Canada deals with Indigenous people nationally, all across this country, whether we're in Elsipogtog, Six Nations, Tyendinaga, Anishinaabe territory, or out here in Secwepemc or Tsleil-Waututh, they'll use the legal and the political and the police force in order to deal with the underlying issue. And the underlying issue is that we have title and rights to this land. The issue is that we can be the decision makers on our land, and we have the rights to choose who the decision makers will be. We have the rights to decide on these decision-making governance process or procedures that we make up our decisions. And here in our nation, when we say no to this pipeline, like I say, we expect the government to respect it, but we see the way that the government handles Indigenous resistance, and us executing and asserting our title and our rights to our lands is they will use the police force. We've seen it time and time again. We've seen all the arrests. I think that's my, we have all the arrests in, up at the Burnaby Mountain terminals. We had the arrest at Westridge Terminal, right when we barely got arrested. This is my son calling, sorry guys. They threatened us with arrest just by monitoring the spill site the other day at the Kinder Morgan facility pumping station. I'm gonna actually just leave it at that, because I am getting these calls in.
That's fine. I want to come back to you on this question, Canahus, in a bit, so you can talk a bit about the man camps and the correlation to the MMIGW issue. But let's hear from Cedar on your thoughts on the question.
Can you just wait 1 second? Someone's going by with some stuff. You can keep talking.
I'll do a quick response. Okay, go, Cedar, go.
Okay, what was the question? Sorry, I couldn't hear for a good while.
Yeah, the question was sorry, I just got to go back in my notes here.
Oh my God.
Does this decision to purchase the Kinder Morgan project with taxpayers' dollars reproduce violent relationships between the state of Canada and Indigenous peoples? And if so, does this mean what does this mean for efforts towards reconciliation touted by Justin Trudeau and his government's platform?
I'm calling you on yours.
I love how everyone's just having serious issues with tech right now. Cedar, can you mute yours, because you've got like a weird ringing sound coming through. Can you hear us now?
Go for it, Ariel.
Canahus, can you jump back in now? Oh, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I could talk too.
Here, let's let Canahus finish her answer now. And sorry for all the tech problems, everyone. This is technology. 2018, we're still doing this.
Okay, so what we're dealing with right now in Secwepemc territory is that we have many proposed man camps that are being proposed in our nation, and these man camps would be housing the construction workers for this Trans Mountain pipeline proposed to come through 518 kilometers of our territory, of this 1,000+ kilometer pipeline. And some of the big risks that we're facing is just specifically these man camps being erected and built within our territory. Some of the man camps want to house 1,000 men, and hearing from all of the women that we've dealt with and worked with directly from North Dakota in dealing with the man camps is that it will bring violence against women. They've seen it firsthand. We've seen and talked to other Indigenous women that do this work that are talking about the police reports that are coming out from these man camps, where there's young girls as younger than 13 screaming, crying, coming out naked from these man camps. These are real risks we're hearing specifically from other Indigenous women and testimonials around these man camps. We don't want to risk that. All these man camps are located, proposed to be located 1 kilometer off the main highway. And we already know these highways are linked with the disappearance of a lot of our women. This pipeline, it follows Highway 5 all the way up, and then once it hits north, it connects onto Highway 16, which is dubbed the Highway of Tears already. So these are the risks, and when we talk about violence, the violence is always being perpetuated at the hands of the Canadian government and directed to us as Indigenous people. And the violence has not stopped. It's been, that's the way that Canada was formed, was they used violence, they used their RCMP, they used their residential school system, they used the reservation system. Those were all forms of violent, attacks on us and the genocide on us as Indigenous people. And now 2018, we're here defending our very life, our very existence as Indigenous people. When Canada says we're going to purchase this pipeline and we're going to push this pipeline through no matter what, they're saying we don't care whether we're going to push this through the bodies of Indigenous women. They don't care. That's what they're showing by saying we're going to purchase this pipeline. They might as well stab us through the heart with that metal pipe. That's what Canada is doing, and that's what Justin Trudeau is doing, and all of the other civil servants that are participating in this decision. It's not just Trudeau, there's civil servants, the RCMP, they're all hand in hand coordinated, to take as much land as they can from Indigenous people. We see the Alberta tar sands as one of the biggest violent attacks on the world. The Alberta tar sands is impacting Indigenous people. There's people reaching out from communities around the Alberta tar sands showing pictures and documenting the wounds, the sores, the skin lesions that are all coming because of the water. There's irreparable damage that is happening to our brothers and sisters right now because of the water quality. We don't want to risk that. We come from the land of the spilling waters, all of these mountains all throughout so-called British Columbia, that's the size of Washington State, Oregon, and California combined. That's a large geographical land base of water, pure water, the world's cleanest water, and that's what we're protecting. This water is the source for our culture and our life, our berries, our hunting, our fishing, our roots, our medicines, everything that we harvest and collect from the land, our basket making, our weaving, our language, everything flows from the land. And if the land is destroyed, we are also destroyed. And that's why we'll stand so fiercely in defense of this land. The civil disobedience, and they call us protesters. No, there's a political conflict that is happening in Canada right now. And Trudeau government, we believe, declared war on Indigenous people by pushing this pipeline through. That's how intense this has got now here in British Columbia.
It is incredibly disturbing, the parallels, around murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and the extractive industry. Everywhere you go, not just in Canada, but across Mother Earth, you hear the stories about the amassing of transient workers, predominantly non-Indigenous, going into these rural places, and you see the increase in the exploitation of women, go right up with the increase of development in these places on every continent of the planet. And I'm reminded of the good work of aunties like Faith Spotted Eagle and Candy Mossett from the Indigenous Environmental Network, who works in the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota. There was a lot of concern by not just grandmas and moms and sisters, but by the entire nations in those territories that were dealing with man camps associated to the fracking boom or the Keystone XL pipeline or the DAPL pipeline. And it's really interesting, in this era of Me Too and this lack of consent, that our Native people have, and for Justin Trudeau to just do what he does, I find it very disturbing. I want to go to the next question that I had for all of you before we take a few more questions here, because we've got about 15 minutes. But Cedar, I wanted to go back to you, and I wanted to ask you, what are some of the next steps that people should take to support Tsleil-Waututh, to support the Watch House in this next phase of this fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline?
First, I just wanted to go back to the question before. One thing that just real quick, I just want to say, well, do they want to lose the hard way or the easy way? That's what I want to know. And one thing is that we made promises to protect our young ones, and that's the only thing that we're doing. We're just carrying out that promise that we took, that when our young ones were born in our family, that we would protect them. That's all we're doing. We're committing to our promise. And anyways, what are the next steps we can take? Well, supporting, maybe having same-day actions as Vancouver and Seattle and Victoria. I sit here with my friend Emily right here to my right. You can show yourself. So I'm in Victoria right now in solidarity for having these rallies that we're coordinating the same days or within the same week actions. It could be divestment, it could be Kinder Morgan, Trudeau, anything like that, to have coordinates and see what we're all doing to really stay in discussion, to really keep us in discussion, to really make sure that we're in solidarity. And that's the same thing with Seattle. So right now we want to spread out from there. We want to spread out from there to have maybe same-day actions. Also come to the Watch House, As you look at what happened in Seattle with the Chase Bank, that's because of Chase Bank's the number one funder of tar sands on Wall Street. And then you see what happened the other day on the Kinder Morgan terminal. We already shut down the terminal twice. Yesterday, we shut down all the streets right here in Victoria. And so these are the three cities that we're doing out of solidarity. And we encourage anybody who's listening right now to hit us up on Facebook, Cedar George Parker. You can say your name out loud.
My name's Emily Thiessen.
Emily Thiessen from Victoria. And then we also have Victoria Leisman, too, one of the people in Seattle. We also have support from around the world, and the biggest thing you could go to is educate yourself. Go to protecttheinlet.ca and go to protecttheinlet.ca and educate yourself on this, Educate yourself on the true facts and where the world's going, and the world is going in renewable energy. If you look at Vegas, it's one of the leaders right now. In renewable energy, you go down there and the houses and the tiles are out there. And people think just because the clouds are out doesn't mean, it means that you can't have renewable energy. But it's like, no, the sun rays go through the clouds and they hit them. So the next steps really is to stay in discussion, stay in solidarity. We have to stick together is what I remember the elders saying. I remember the elders saying right now is time to make those allies. Right now is the time to use your gifts towards something good. Right now is the time because after this issue, we're going to go to the next issue. After this issue, after we win, I believe we'll win. It's time that we really, really bring our peoples together and have those solidarity. We were just down in Texas at the Chase Bank shareholders meeting, and we're talking with the people at the Bayou Bridge. We're talking to the people from Line 3, and we say we need to come together in solidarity. Imagine, and we just imagined. What we did was just imagine how strong we can be if we're all together on this, having those same-day actions. Coming to the Watch House and really supporting the Watch House. Well, if you don't know what the Watch House is, it's the initiative that we put. It's like a longhouse, right? So we put a Watch House on the forefront of the Kinder Morgan terminal to have actions right in front of the gates where the trucks come in and out. And we've had a lot of people get arrested, which is nothing even compared to the 28,000 people who signed that they'll get arrested for this. So it's either Kinder Morgan and Trudeau wants to lose the easy way or the hard way, because we got 28,000 people who signed up. That's not even the ones who know that you could sign up. This was a while ago. We got people all across the world wanting to support. We got different cities on both sides of the borders, different sides of the countries ready to support. And that's where our generation comes in, and that's where we come in to say that we have hope. Especially, what's going on with our Indigenous peoples. We have grasped the ways of this Western society. and we're going to become one of the proudest segments of it. You know, we're now as Indigenous people, we're becoming business leaders, just like Tulalip and Tsleil-Waututh. We're becoming entrepreneurs, we're becoming political figures, you know, and that's what we can do, is really just being solidarity, see what we can do together and have same-day actions. We need to come together, and now is the time to use your gifts to help. And my timer's done.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you mentioned, you know, the whole act of taking action and the importance of that, and the pledge to protect that tens of thousands of BC citizens have taken. You know, the judges, you know, I just came back from court today. I was one of the people who took bold action at the gates of Kinder Morgan and facing criminal contempt charges. And one of the questions we had was what happened in court today. The lawyers of Kinder Morgan did do an intervention, to a surprise intervention, a surprise application to expand the injunction, which has significantly increased the risk. So, you know, for people who are taking action now, there are higher penalties, including potentially jail time. And the injunction has been expanded to anywhere Kinder Morgan is working in British Columbia, in the entire jurisdiction of British Columbia. So the stakes couldn't be higher right now, you know, and I just wanted to give that brief update. But I wanted to take it to you, Ariel, and end with Kanahus. You know, what are ways that people can help fight against, you know, you mentioned the Tech project. This is going to be the largest ever tar sands mine if built. We need a Goliath effort to fight against this expansion project. The Kinder Morgan pipeline will facilitate this expansion. And at some point in late 2018 or 2019, the final approval for the Tech mine will go across Justin Trudeau's desk. So, Ariel Deranger, what are some ways that people can take meaningful action to support groups in Alberta, so-called Alberta, fighting the Tech mine and Kinder Morgan?
Well, first off, there's a couple folks that I've seen from the Athabasca region. I just want to shout out to Melanie and shout out to Lionel, who are on the line. They're members of both Mikisew and ACFN, and they had some real questions around what they can do when our leadership is negotiating deals with these companies, and what can the public do. For one, any citizen can sign up to be an intervener in the joint review processes for these projects. During the Enbridge Northern Gateway process, they encouraged people to sign up and show up at the hearings, and I am going to encourage the same thing here. The hearings are going to be sometime in early 2019. They could be as early as this fall, but it's highly unlikely. You can check out how to get involved if you go to the SIA page. I will put it on the Facebook thread in a few minutes. I'm just trying to find the right document for this. But anyone can join, anyone can sign up. So even as members of the First Nations in the region, if you're concerned about this project and you're concerned about what our leadership is saying, you have the right as an individual citizen to stand up at those hearings and give forward any evidence. You can also look to speak with some of the folks that are involved with the Keepers of the Athabasca that are trying to put together a delegation to go to the hearings. Other organizations in Alberta will also be present at the hearings, but I encourage you all to take a look. There will be different public commenting periods where you can get involved and you can support the opposition. You can explain why you don't want to see this project, but we all have a responsibility to stand up. Like, we can't just put this on the onus of leadership, because our leadership is getting a lot of pressure, not just from the corporations, but from the governments. I mean, look at what happened with Kinder Morgan. When the opposition was starting to get really high, they bailed out an entire corporation. We have a government that is now in direct public collusion with a private entity, giving them billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. This isn't new. Like, this is the thing, is like everyone feels like this is a new thing, but we've been giving millions and probably over the years billions of dollars of tax subsidies to these companies in Alberta for decades already. And the expenses has been at the First Nations community. So we have to absolutely start stepping up and stepping in and taking our own personal roles and responsibilities to join the conversations to oppose these projects through the joint review processes is the easiest way. Another piece for folks that are really wanting to get involved in not just tar sands issues, because I've seen a couple of folks talk about fracking and water issues. There's going to be a fantastic conference at the end of this month in Nisqually Territory in Washington State, just near Olympia, Washington, just a little ways from Seattle for those that don't know the geography down there. But the 17th Protecting Mother Earth Conference, hosted by the Indigenous Environmental Network, co-hosted by the Indigenous Environmental Network, and the Nisqually Nation down in Washington State will be hosting a beautiful 4-day conference from June 28th to July 1st. Everyone is welcome. You can go check it out. So Google Protecting Mother Earth Conference. Registration is free. There are even travel subsidies for if you are an Indigenous person coming from an impacted community. And we'd love to see you all there because that's a part of it. We have to come and stand together and share our stories. And I just want to share one little quick story. I heard a prophecy, a story from a friend of mine that talked with some elders up in the north in Alaska. And he talked about how this elder had told him this story of how our people survived the last ice age. And that in order for us to survive that last ice age, we had to all come together. We had to abandon our wars and our territorial disputes, and we all had to come together to share our skills and to share our knowledge of the land in order for us to survive as a species, in order to survive this great time of change. And that it was also prophesied that this time of change, the last ice age, was just one, and that there would come a time when there would be even more change. And in order for us to survive, we would once again all have to come back together. And we'd have to share our collective knowledge to find solutions to come out. So gatherings like the Protecting Mother Earth Conference and places where we can come together as Indigenous peoples to collectively share our visions, our values, our stories is going to be critical for our survival. So I invite you all to come down and really hope to see you all there. And of course, get on the SIA webpage and send your messages to tech.
Awesome. Thank you, Ariel. And folks, if you want to have more information how to support Indigenous climate action and protect the inlet, go to their websites, indigenousclimateaction.com and protecttheinlet.ca. You can make a donation there. I also want to mention the Terminal City Legal Collective here in Vancouver. If you're looking for meaningful ways to support those people that have taken bold action thus far and been arrested resisting Kinder Morgan, you can donate to the Kinder Morgan Legal Fund for people that have, that are facing fines and other expenses related to going to court. Kanahus, what are some meaningful steps that people can take to support Teeny House Warriors, its Coquitlam women and peoples, fighting to protect Coquitlam territory from this pipeline?
Well, I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate all the work going into organizing this webinar, and also all the people out there that have taken that bold action and direct action and we're faced with arrest and charges that they're facing right now going to court. I know that the government really tries to wear people down through that process as well. I went through that process. Right now we are building tiny houses. It's actually outside. I could try to move my computer a little bit to show you in just a second here. But one of the things is that I'd like to note is that the Secwepemc Nation is like a very large nation. The BC-Alberta border actually cuts, through our territory. And so Notley has a big fight on her hand if she thinks that they're going to push this pipeline through, because they will be facing the fierceness of us as Secwepemc Women Warriors. We addressed her. We went right to her office a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, as we traveled up through the whole section of the Trans Mountain Pipeline all the way to the Edmonton terminal. And I'll tell you that this beautiful territory, we will not risk or sacrifice it for this pipeline. We have, like I said, the Tiny House Warriors, we're looking for builders right now. We have this build going on until June 9th. We also have a Volume 1 album. We need everybody to bump that all summer long. You could get it on Bandcamp. There's organizing that will be happening in San Francisco to unite all of us across that medicine line. I believe that's going to be closer to the summer solstice time. People could probably check that out. But another thing we're doing in a really creative art of resistance is organizing a tattoo gathering, a traditional tattoo gathering, Tattoos Not Pipelines, and we're going to be organizing that from July 5th and 8th. So all of you that want to get your medicine tattoos and your warrior tattoos for this fight on the front line, stay tuned to that. We'll be posting that on Tiny House Warriors. And again, divest. There's a lot of Canadian banks that are investing, are going to continue to push this Trans Mountain Pipeline through to divest. And also I had a professor just sitting in with me right here, but he had to leave with his students. He's a professor at TRU. He said to make sure that we talk to the university students, for the university students to also mobilize. There's a lot of universities here in BC that have accepted money from Kinder Morgan, and so for them to mobilize and ask their universities to withdraw that money or not accept the money from Kinder Morgan. I also know that Kinder Morgan also appeals to powwows and different things to give them money. So it looks like there's support about Kinder Morgan, but we need people not to accept this money from Kinder Morgan, whether it's powwows or youth groups or anything else, because this is violating Indigenous rights, and we need everybody to stand with us. To the media out there that may be watching and listening to this, we really need you to get the story straight around who our decision makers and the rightful title holders and the true leadership involved in this fight are. There's people that have been involved in this fight for generations, and Kinder Morgan and the Canadian government have handpicked or manufactured these leaders to show like there's consent, but they manufactured this consent by picking these certain leaders and putting them in the forefront as if they're giving decisions and saying yes to this pipeline, but it's not. A lot of these people that are making these claims that they're pro-pipeline and they want this pipeline to go through have a lot of skeletons in their closet, and we know, living and being raised in these Indigenous communities, who the violators of women are. And a lot of times the ones that are making these decisions are the ones that are the weak ones, and the ones that are standing up in our nations are actually the healthy and strong Indigenous people that have a voice to stand up because they've dealt with major forms of oppression, childhood trauma, all of these things that are related to colonization, to find their way and their power to be able to stand up and fight back against this system that's oppressing us. So just make note that the ones that are standing on the front line are very strong and powerful and have a lot of people that are supporting them. Myself, I have hundreds of family members that are all opposed to this pipeline, just in my family alone. So I know we're 4 people here today, but I know that all of our thousands of ancestors are behind us, and all the people that are watching and all the good power and prayers that are out there to protect our lands. And we will win this battle, and we will stop this Trans Mountain Pipeline from coming through.
Yes, I appreciate you clarifying. That was one of the questions, was how do we deal with the, what did Malcolm X refer to it as, house something or other? But the Ernie Crays of the world, the President David Chartrands of the world, all of these Native leaders who have not been briefed on climate change, climate science, or the implications and ramifications of the impacts of a bitumen spill in rivers, salmon rivers, or on the coast. Getting on television and saying that this is in the economic interest of Indigenous peoples. Well, I haven't seen David Chartrand go up and talk to community members in the Athabasca region who have lost family members to rare forms of cancer. I haven't seen Chief Ernie Cray cite, any of the impacts of the Kalamazoo River bitumen spill. And there's a whole host of these ones that only see the money. And I think that it's really important that Canadians watching this live stream, this webinar, that it's really important that you don't generalize Indigenous peoples. We are not a monolith. We are all unique, very different Indigenous nations who share some common principles, as particularly in regards to our responsibility to defend the sacredness of Mother Earth for future generations. But the federal government of Canada has a fiduciary and legal obligation to each individual First Nations, and there is no pan-Canadian First Nations cookie cutter solution. The feds have to consult meaningfully and adequately and accommodate, each individual First Nation. So irregardless of how many Métis leaders or First Nations leaders sign deals with the private sector or with the federal government of Canada on projects like Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline, it only takes one First Nation to step up and to assert their territorial jurisdiction in support of those warriors on the front line, those water protectors on the front line who are doing this work for future generations. And so I'm going to give each person 1 minute just to say their final remark, and we're going to thank you all for tuning in today to hear this response to the controversial announcement made by Justin Trudeau's Finance Minister Bill Morneau to buy Houston-based energy giant Kinder Morgan's pipeline for $4.5 billion of Canadian taxpayers' money. I'll go to you, Cedar, if you want to give just a short little sign off.
Hey, so yeah, we're gonna beat this. It's not happening. This pipeline is not happening. I got two young people right here in our early 20s who said we'll put our lives on the line for this. Young people right here, we will, 100%. Ain't nothing stopping this. Now we have support from everybody around the world. And the biggest thing is that I can tell you that my favorite pizza is margarita. That's a lie. I can tell you my favorite pizza is cheese. That's a lie. I can tell you my favorite pizza is pepperoni, and that's a lie. And for all the people on here listening, it's that easy for a politician to lie. It's that easy to lie on a pedestal. So question your governments, question who's in charge, question the news who are getting paid out by these corporations. These corporations have the money to rule almost the world. It's these corporations, and we need to be the people to say no means no. No means no to this pipeline. No, it should go towards the betterment and social uplifts of the people by the people. This is a democracy. We're supposed to be part of the government, but yet we're fighting the government. They're supposed to keep us safe and secure and comfortable, but yet we're fighting for that. We're the ones fighting for that, for a clean future, and this is not in the national interest of our generation and everyone's generation living right now and the generations to come. We need to go with the global standard of renewable energy. If you look at Europe and which way they're going, the United States and which way they're going, Trump land is doing better than Canada in that department. Jesus Christ, come on, man. And so what I wanted to say is that our generation is hopeful. These scare tactics are not going to work on us that the government are trying to put on us about getting arrested, because they forget that, man, we love action, but we love talking too. I remember what the elders have told us, what the elders have said, that if you're educational, political, but most of all go forward with being cultural, nothing can stop you. So I encourage you guys to be on those aspects, because it works for our people, it works for me, it works for us too right here. Let's get in here. This is the three young people who said we'll put our lives on the line, 20, 24, 21, 18. We're all here. This is what it looks like. This is what we're fighting for. This is what we're doing. This is real,
Wow.
Wanted to say, yep, thank you guys. Thank you, Canahus. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Clayton. I was just telling them how much. I said, you guys gotta listen to these people. This is like, I learned so much from these people, and I was like, I try to talk like them, but that didn't work. So now I gotta talk like myself. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And anybody listening on here, these are the people making a big difference, and we need you too. Let's educate ourselves politically, and let's be cultural and win this. It's not gonna happen. All my relations. Thank you.
Oh.
Bye.
And Canahus, we'll go to you. What's your closing message for our webinar today?
Well, I'd just like to say that my brother Skahish, he's just coming back from a trip from Paris and from London where he met with Aviva, and that was one of the, insurance companies and investors, I believe, too, of the tech resources. Ariel could clarify if I'm wrong, but he met with them. They met with a bunch of different insurance companies in Paris this past week, where all the top insurance companies of the world were meeting in Paris, and a lot of the truth that came out there, that the Indigenous people do not give consent, that there's going to continue to be conflict and confrontation around this Trans Mountain pipeline, that all these top insurers, they need to stop insuring this pipeline. They need insurance for the construction of this pipeline to go through. We're asking everybody, we need to devalue this pipeline. We need to block this construction, of this pipeline all along the way. That includes stopping the construction of the man camps. That this is a political conflict, and that Canada needs to handle this in a diplomatic way. They can't go forth like they're just the say-all, end-all. We have rights and we have title that exist, that go from the beginning of time, tens and tens of thousands of years, that we have continued to occupy our lands, use our lands, and continue to benefit from our lands in this reciprocal relationship that has not stopped. And we still continue this relationship with the land, and that's why we are here speaking about why it's so important and crucial for us to defend our lands. Right now, with Canada nationalizing this pipeline, it's also nationalizing the risk and socializing the risks here, on this pipeline, that we aren't going to stop. We're going to continue to bring that risk and uncertainty to this pipeline. So this pipeline cannot make money. Canada wishes and hopes that at the end, after this pipeline, they hope will be in the ground. It's going to continue. It's going to have an asset that they're going to, hopefully, they're wishing to sell. We don't want to, have this pipeline be of value. We wanted to devalue this pipeline, and so we will continue to block this construction. We'll continue this conflict and confrontation with the Trans Mountain pipeline, and that includes Canada at this time. So we need everybody out there to be on board with Indigenous people. For the Canadians out there, read my father's books, Reconciliation Manifesto and Unsettling Canada. You'll get a whole background of where we're all coming from, and let's stop this pipeline.
Thank you, Canahus. Ariel, final remarks for this webinar.
So, I feel like it's always so good to be able to hear the voices of this resistance and this movement, because I feel like a lot of folks ask a lot of the times, why do you do what you do? They've asked me this question, and I always answer the same, is that I didn't choose to be in this movement. I was born into this movement. And you can hear that in the words of Canahus. You can hear that in the words of Cedar. You can hear that in the words of Clayton. We didn't choose to be a part of these battles. These battles have come to us. We have continued to be on the front lines because it is our rights, it is our Indigenous laws, it's our indigeneity overall that continues to be eroded and challenged. Recently, I was talking a lot about what is civil disobedience and how do we support people that are engaged in civil disobedience, that are out there crossing these arbitrary lines of trespass. And now the stakes are even higher in the case of Kinder Morgan because it's now a state-owned project. But what we have to understand is that we are not engaged in civil disobedience. We are engaged in civil obedience, the obedience of our laws, our Indigenous laws that have been continually erased and marginalized and pushed to the sidelines over and over and over again. We absolutely must start to not just get rid of this pipeline and stop this pipeline, because another one will be born. We have to stop this pipeline, but we have to stop white supremacy. We have to stop the neo-colonial agenda. We have to stop continued the marginalization and oppression of Indigenous people, because otherwise we will never win. This is much bigger than a pipeline, and that's the problem. This is the biggest argument I get in with people. This isn't about a pipeline, people. This isn't about the oil that goes in the pipeline. This is about the systems that have eroded and devalued Indigenous people to the point that they think they can create these infrastructures and energy projects without our consent, that continue to marginalize our rights and destroy our ecosystems and our ability to continue who we are. So I encourage you not just to challenge this pipeline, but to challenge the entrenched systems, to recognize Indigenous rights, to truly work towards real recognition, truth and reconciliation, and the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, so that our communities can actually have the legal standings and recognition of the rights we have been trying so hard to have recognized for over 500 years on this continent. So I just want to say thank you to Kanahus, thank you to Cedar, thank you to Will who couldn't make it today, and thank you for Clayton and all of the people that joined us, that support this movement, that are supporting Indigenous rights, because this movement isn't anything without all of you, and I feel so good. My heart feels so full to be standing alongside such incredible people. So Masi Cho, hi hi.
Well, I want to just say what an honor and a privilege and how humbling it is to be able to moderate such an incredible panel of leaders doing such incredible and inspiring work out in the world. I want to encourage all of you who have tuned into this webinar or are watching it after it's been posted to please, if you have an opportunity, a way to make a donation, a cash donation, to protect the inlet, to Tiny House Warriors or Indigenous Climate Action, or heck, all three, please do so. And if you don't have time to do that, please send information to the information emails listed on all the websites on how you can contribute, whether it's through volunteering, writing an op-ed, or taking some kind of direct action, because direct action is not just blockading and hanging off of buildings. It's also writing letters. It's also hosting a movie watching party, to watch any number of the movies that profile Indigenous resistance to extractive industries at your home or workplace. And for more information on the work of 350, please follow us on Twitter at 350 Canada. You can follow me on Twitter at pre-Clayton to get updates on the fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. But the primary source for that is protecttheinlet.ca. And again, just to, I was in court today, so I want to mention, please find ways to support all of the arrestees. There are ways that you can make donations to the Terminal City Legal Collective, which is supporting all of the folks who have stepped up and taken bold action at the gates of Kinder Morgan and who are now facing charges. So thanks so much for tuning in. This will not be the last of Indigenous Climate Action's webinars, so please stay tuned for more incredible digital content from our good friends at Indigenous Climate Action.